Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We have a number of people still logging in. I'm Heidi Gentwerk. I'm the CEO of Federation, and just want to orient you a bit to this webinar. As you can see, we just have the screens of the folks who are speaking. We have a Q&A available at the bottom of your screen, which you can see, and throughout the presentation, and then an opportunity for Q&A afterwards. We encourage you to put your questions into that Q&A. We will get to as many questions as possible today. We really want to have a robust discussion. We're very lucky to have Professor Cohen here. So make sure that you go to that Q&A. Again, if you want a question addressed today, that's the way to do it. So thanks, and I am excited to turn it over to my dear friend and the CEO of our Lawrence Family JCC, Betsy Lynch, to get us started.
Thank you so much, Heidi, and thank you to everyone joining us today in this very important conversation. We are thrilled to be inviting Professor Amichai Cohen to begin to help us understand the complexities of the situations unfolding with the review of judicial policies in Israel. The purpose of today's conversation is to begin for us to have a window into what the experience that Israel is going through right now and the complexities of the situation. And obviously, Professor Cohen will show us and explain to us multiple perspectives, and we are very grateful that he is here with us today. We have a follow-up webinar, which Heidi, I'm sure will share more about on the 26th, that will further investigate these issues as the history that's happening in Israel right now continues to unfold. I'd like to introduce Professor Amichai Cohen, who is a senior fellow at the Center of Security and Democracy at the Institute for Israeli Democracy Institute. Professor Amichai Cohen is a member of the faculty of the law at Ono Academic College. He earned his degrees from Hebrew University in Jerusalem and Yale University here in the United States. He has served as the Dean of Faculty of the Law at the Ono Academic College and a visiting professor at the American University Washington College of Law in Washington, D.C. and in Columbia. He's written multiple books related to Israel's national security law and other dynamics related to international humanitarian law. And we are so glad that he is here with us today to share his insights. Professor Cohen, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks for everyone joining in this webinar. It's afternoon here in Israel, actually early evening here in Israel. So good morning to you and good evening from Israel. 10 weeks ago, when I started giving talks in Hebrew and English regarding the proposed changes in Israel's judicial branch, I used to start from the very beginning. How are judges nominated in Israel? What is the background of Israeli constitutional law, etc. I find it increasingly that people I speak with now in both Israel and the United States already have a lot of background knowledge regarding this situation. So I'm asking your forgiveness in advance. I'll give some background knowledge and try to describe the issues. I'm sure many of you already have some knowledge about these issues. So I'll try to be brief and concise. And after perhaps 20 or 30 minutes of analysis and description, we'll open it up to a conversation, to questions, and perhaps then you'll be able to delve more on the issues. With your permission, I'll share a short presentation. Just please let me know, Heidi or Betsy, or that you can see the presentation. Is it okay?
We're good. We can see it.
Very good. And can you see it moving? Just a second. Is it moving?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. So we're good to go. So the first thing we have to speak about is the background. And the background in Israel, I want to speak about two issues. First is the fact that actually Israel does not have a real constitution. Israel has basic laws which are hierarchically above regular laws. It means that the court can strike down regular laws that conflict with basic law. However, basic laws can be changed by a regular procedure. So the rules of the game are not protected in Israel. And this is exactly what we are seeing today. There is an attempt, and the first part of this is perhaps going to materialize early next week, to change some of the rules of the game in Israel. And it actually only requires a simple majority in the Knesset. And since the current government holds, by definition, majority in the Israeli parliament, in the Knesset, then it's able to change the rules of the game. This is the basic point of Israeli constitutional law. Another point, background point to understand in Israeli constitutional law is that not only is it easy, relatively easy to change the rules of the game in Israel, because Israeli constitutional law, the basic laws, are not protected in the sense that they can be changed by a simple majority in the Knesset. Israel also lacks many other common checks and balances which other democracies have. So, for example, we'll take the American system. So there's federalism. So the power is decentralized between the states and the central government. There's two houses, the president and a Congress. In many countries, in Europe, for example, there's the European Union, which in some ways is a supranational above the states. There are regional human rights courts, for example, the European Court of Human Rights. So many democracies have a decentralization of political power, mechanisms of decentralization of political power. Israel lacks all these. All political power in Israel is centralized in the hands of the leaders of the ruling coalition. The leaders of the ruling coalition hold all political power in Israel. The only checks and balances, it's actually a check and balance in Israel, is the Israeli judicial branch, so the court. And a lot of the changes that are taking place today are vis-a-vis the strength of the Israeli judicial branch, the legal system. Because what happened, I think, perhaps because of the fact that the political power is so centralized, is that the judicial branch has also become very strong, and relatively to other judicial branches in other democracies around the world, the Israeli judicial branch, the court, is very strong, it's active, and perhaps we'll speak a little more about examples in the Q&A. So this is the background of the situation. So what happened politically? Politically, in 2019, Prime Minister Netanyahu was indicted on charges of breach of trust, bribery, and fraud, and this has started a political crisis in Israel. Many of you probably remember 5 rounds of elections in 3 years. In December 29th, 2022, so just less than 3 months ago, Netanyahu formed a new government, this time with a stable majority, a right-wing, perhaps the most right-wing in Israeli history. And in January 2023, Justice Minister Levin presented his proposal for changes, mostly in the judicial branch in Israel. These proposed changes, the package of changes actually consists of 4 major changes. The first is the way judges or justices, especially justices of the Israeli Supreme Court, are appointed, judicial review of legislation, the government legal service, and administrative review of reasonableness. In the interest of time, and of course in leaving time for more questions and answers, I'll focus on the first 2, especially on the first one, the appointment of judges, which is the current part of the package of changes, which is going to be voted in the coming week voted on in the coming week in the Knesset. So the judicial appointment process. So the Israeli judicial appointment process, the traditional one, it was formed in 1953, and with minor changes along the years. There is a 9-member committee which appoints judges. There are 4 politicians, 2 ministers, and 2 members of Knesset. There are 2 representatives of the Israeli bar and 3 justices of the Israeli Supreme Court. This is the appointment committee. In order to appoint a justice to the Israeli Supreme Court, a majority of 7 is required. So you can easily see that there is a veto power for the coalition, for the politicians from the ruling coalition, and there is a veto power for the justices. So there is some kind of balance in the appointment process. Now I'm opening here a parenthesis. I know that for Americans, the idea that justices will be involved in the appointment process of justices to the Supreme Court seems, I would even say, bizarre, but actually this process is quite accepted within democracies. No less than 10 other democracies have some kind of process in which justices of the Supreme Court have veto power of different kinds over appointments to the judicial branch. However, granted, this gives the justices a lot of power over the appointment process. I'm going back to my earlier point. The judicial branch in Israel developed as a very strong institution, mostly in response to the development of the centralization of political power in Israel, which is not decentralized in any form that is, or mechanism that is accepted in other democracies. So that's the current situation. What are the proposed changes? So what the Knesset will vote on, starting tomorrow, I think, with the votes in the committee and then in the plenary next week. This is the suggestion. The coalition in the committee, which will consist of 3 ministers and 3 members of Knesset, will have 6 votes. The opposition in the committee will have 2 votes, and justices will have 3 votes in the committee. A regular majority will be required, so 6 out of the 11 will be required for appointing the first 2 judges in every session of the Knesset. A session, I mean, between elections. So the election, and then a new committee is formed consisting of the opposition, members of the opposition and the coalition. In every such committee, the first 2 justices appointed to the Supreme Court will be voted on by simple majority, meaning the coalition could appoint them without requiring any support from the opposition or from the justices. The third appointment of a justice within a session of the committee will require an agreement of at least 1 member of the opposition. The fourth appointment of a justice will require also, in addition to the members of the coalition and one member of the opposition, also an assent by one justice of the three justices of the committee. This is quite a complicated system, and it's presented as a kind of compromise between the requirement of the coalition or the original plan to simply appoint justices by the coalition and the resistance to the fact that the coalition will be able to appoint justices without any voice or authority to the opposition or to the justices. So it's presented as some kind of a compromise. I must say that the compromise here is not really a compromise. The session of the Knesset in Israel is on average a little more than 2 years. So we have on average elections every 2.5 years, although there's a maximum of 4 years between elections. And within 2.5 years, there's usually 2.5 appointments of justices to the Supreme Court. So the compromise here is not so significant. However, that's the current suggestion before the Knesset that's going to be voted on, I think, later this week in the committee and early next week in the plenary of the Knesset. The second important, I think, suggestion by Justice Minister Levin and a member of Knesset Simcha Rotman, who's the chairperson of the Constitutional Committee in the Knesset, is regarding judicial review. So right now, judicial review based on contradiction with basic laws is it's formally it's in the authority of every court in the Israeli system. In fact, in practice, it's only used by the Israeli Supreme Court, and not sitting in its full capacity of 15 members. Usually, the panel that deals with the judicial review is somewhere between 7 and 11 justices, based on the decision of the president of the court, and in regular majority within the court. So a regular majority within the panel can decide that the law contradicts the basic laws and should, because of that, be stricken down. The proposal is that in order for the court to strike down a law, there'll need to be a panel consisting of the entire panel of the Supreme Court, so 15 members of the Supreme Court. They'll need, right now the proposal is 80% of the judges, so 12 out of the 15 judges will have to agree to a decision in order to strike down a law. This, of course, the requirement of 80% of 12 out of the 15 judges means that a small number of, let's say, if the law is a more liberal one, then a small block of conservatives, a relatively small block of conservatives will be able to sustain the law and reject, veto any decision to strike it down. There is another suggestion, and frankly, I'm opening a parenthesis here. People dealing with constitutional law right now in Israel are, how do I say it mildly, lacking sleep. I think would be a correct description, because every hour, every day, there are changes going on within the committee of the current state of the play. So we start at one point in the morning, and by evening we have changes in the suggestions. So I'm not sure that this suggestion it definitely won't be before Passover, but so it will be discussed after Passover. But the idea of the override clause. So the suggestion is that even if the court decides to strike down a law, the Knesset will be able to override this decision by a regular majority. So the court will say this law contradicts, say, the right to private property, and the Knesset will reenact the law saying, despite the fact that we know the decision of the court is that the law contradicts the right of private property, we are choosing to reenact it. So these are the two main suggestions. Once again, there are differences between there are additional suggestions regarding reasonableness and regarding the status of the legal advisors, but I think that's enough. We spoke about the two main suggestions. What about the political support for the suggestion? So of course, it's hard to measure, but we tried at the Israel Democracy Institute to measure. The first thing we noticed is that a lot of people are participating in activities, actual activities against the changes. So in January, we measured about 15% of the Jews participated in some protest activity, so demonstrations, signing petitions, some kind, and the number is growing. So we have in February about 19% of the Jews in Israel participating in some protest against the changes. I'm not saying here that because 19% participated, then it means that the majority is against it. Not at all. I'm just saying that the pictures you see on TV of mass demonstrations are actually something every Israeli feels. There are a lot of people in the streets. So every Saturday night, once a week, there's usually some attempt to halt traffic and you know, the general work day in Israel. So a lot of people are involved in these attempts. The public support to the changes, we're not exactly sure. It's moving. So you know, the depends a lot of the way you ask the question. So should the Supreme Court have the power to strike down laws in the Knesset? There is a small but relatively stable majority. When you break it down, should the Knesset have an override power? Then it depends a lot on the question of whether what is the majority by which the Knesset will be able to override. I think the point is not so much people moving and changing their point of view, but the polarization in Israeli society. And perhaps I think this is the last point I wanna make here in this short, or it's become not so short, introductory part of the session. A lot of the institutions in Israel, the institutions that were the most sacred, I would even say, institutions in Israel are showing signs of cracking. So, for example, the IDF. So the idea of refusal to serve is now something that people speak about. I don't remember any, and this is, you know, my field is I originated in the field of national security, and I don't remember any event in recent or even not so recent Israeli history in which the question of the IDF's status within the society has been so discussed and in question. And I think this is a symptom of the polarization that the Israeli society is undergoing. Now we knew the polarization is underway, we know it for years, but it's now out in the open. So that's, I would say, on the negative side. I think on the positive side, I would say that the fact that a lot of Israelis are now involved in politics from both sides of the aisle and both camps regarding the ideas for judicial changes also presents an opportunity for the Israeli society, perhaps, and I'm just coming now from a discussion on the question of whether it's Israel's constitutional moment, since everyone is already out in a lot of people are out in the streets. A lot of the disagreements within the Israeli society are out in the open. Perhaps this is the time for the Israeli society to make some decisions. It delayed, the need or the agreement on several issues like religion and state and other issues for 75 years. But perhaps after 75 years, it's really the time to make these decisions. So on the positive side, perhaps we'll come out with a clearer constitution from this. I would say it's clear it's a crisis within Israel. So this conclude my short presentation.
I think it's shorter than could have been, looking at how many slides you had there. So thank you so much. We have a lot of questions, and I wonder if we can start just with a personal reflection. What is it like, in your field and as an Israeli living through this time? And does it feel different than anything else you've gone through? And I know, sleep is something that is not possible at this moment, given the days and nights and times I've spoken to you.
So I think personally, I'm in a, I wouldn't say good, but in a position in which I can feel I'm doing something. Because I'm involved in giving lectures in Israel and abroad, then I feel like I'm participating. For a lot of Israelis, the feeling is that they are, a lot of people, as I said, are going out and signing petitions, etc. But what is their actual effect on politics? Is so for people who are doing something, and this is why I encourage my friends, people I speak with. If you do something about it, it has an effect. People are in politics because the basic idea of democracy that politicians want to be re-elected. Then they are listening. And I think it has an effect. And, the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. So we are living in interesting times, no questions about it.
And just speak a bit about the extent and the duration of the reaction that we've seen, the protests, that it's not calming down. In fact, it's growing. Was that a surprise? And how are folks reacting to that?
So I don't think anyone certainly not in the opposition, but even not in the coalition, foresaw what is going on. I want to go back to December. In this, even to November. After the elections in November, I think the general understanding in Israel was that the opposition is now, it really lost the elections. There were disagreement within the opposition. It's going to be a right wing, an easy term for the right wing in the no strong opposition. And what emerged, and it didn't emerge from politicians, it emerged from the street, is a very strong opposition consisting of not, people of all ages, and the economic, economic corporations and institutions. Once again, I'm not saying this is a majority, that there are still disagreements, but the opposition has regrouped in a way that I think really surprised the government. It could not foresee this.
Okay, we have a couple of questions about basic laws. Just give us the very, very highest level. What a basic law is, what's the source of those laws, and how they differ from other regular laws in Israel.
Okay, so a very, very short history lesson, a very short one. In 1948, in the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Independence called for an election to the Constitutional Assembly. And in early 1949, when the War of Independence ended, Israelis went to vote for a Constitutional Assembly. This was the first time Israelis voted. However, within weeks, it became apparent that the Constitutional Assembly is unable to form a constitution. Therefore, the Constitutional Assembly turned itself into the first Knesset. Perhaps this was the first constitutional revolution, and said, okay, we are unable to write a constitution. However, we will write the constitution chapter by chapter. And these chapters are called basic laws. So during the years since 1949, the Israeli Knesset has written 13 basic laws. It's laws dealing with more principled issues, right? For example, the branches of government, the nation of Israel as a national home for the Jewish people. In 1992, the Knesset enacted two basic laws, one basic law, freedom of occupation, and one basic law, human dignity and liberty, which are actually Israel's Bill of Rights. And these serve as the basis of the authority of the court to strike down laws because of the rights protected. In these, not a lot of rights, but some rights are protected within these basic laws. And part of the discussion, and this I'll skip over this very complicated question, is whether the interpretation of the court that it had the authority to strike down laws based on the basic laws was actually intended by the Knesset. So we have our own Marbury versus Madison discussion, only the difference is that it's not a 200 years precedent. The question, it's a one generation precedent, and the discussion is still going on, and it's at the base of a lot of the disagreements right now in Israel.
Okay, and just one last question about the basic laws. You showed some of the polling data around how people feel about the ability of the Supreme Court to strike down something passed by the. Have you asked, or do you know how people feel about the ability to strike down one of the basic laws? I mean, is that something that is up for consideration? Could they do that?
The short answer is that because the basic laws are not protected from change, so they can be enacted by a regular majority, and they also can be changed by a regular majority. The basic laws could have been changed throughout the years. I mean, the current government could have said, listen, we have a majority, we're going to strike down, change, no more basic law, freedom of occupation, no more basic law. It's as simple as that. They have not done it. They have not done it because in the more than 30 years since 1992, the basic laws have actually become part of the fabric of Israeli society. So no government will now strike them down. However, what the government has said is that it doesn't think that the court should have a very easy ability to strike down laws. The government has said and openly said that it feels that the court has used its authority to strike down laws based on these basic law, in a way which is too activist for the majority in the Knesset.
Okay, so a question that came up, which is a fairly bleak question, but it seems relevant. If the Knesset can override the Supreme Court by a simple majority, judicial review by the court is virtually meaningless. Is that right? I mean, does this sort of take away all of the sort of relevance of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, the override clause is a complicated mechanism, because I don't think that a Knesset will have a very easy time, to say, the court will say, let's say something violates the principle of equality, and the Knesset will say, we don't care about equality, we're going to override the decision of the court. It presents a problem for the Knesset. So there is some limitation there. I agree, of course, with the question. It's not a very high bar to pass, but there is some bar over there. The override clause is also problematic from a different angle altogether. If you are looking to lessen the tensions between the Supreme Court and the Knesset, it's a very, very bad way to go about it by introducing an override clause, because the Knesset will introduce statutes not fearing from the court striking them down, so it will go to the extreme. And the court will also not be very careful in striking down, because if the Knesset doesn't like it, it can also override. So right now, the court is hesitant to strike down laws, saying, we have the final word. But if the Knesset will be able to override. So the fear there is that it will raise the tensions between the Knesset and the court also. I don't think it's a very good idea, the override clause, but that's...
Okay, well, so here's a question. If some of the Likud ministers were to vote, or the members of the Knesset, were able to vote against the legislation, could Bibi just fire them and appoint others to replace them so that he gets it passed? Is that within his power to do?
So first of all, no. Members of the Knesset cannot be fired. There is an asterisk there. There is a special kind of members of Knesset who joins the Knesset only because people who were appointed minister resign from the Knesset, and then the next people. However, these people who resign from the Knesset because they became minister, they can de-resign themselves. I mean, they can come back to the Knesset if they wish. So there is, I would say, Class A members of Knesset and Class B members of Knesset. Some members of Knesset can be not fired, but become no member of Knesset. But the question is not really about the Likud members being fired or not. It's the fact that Netanyahu controls the Likud party and the electing committee within the Likud party with a very strong hand. And I don't think that perhaps one or two members of the Likud party are strong enough to go against the Likud, but against Netanyahu right now. Perhaps this will change in the future, but right now it seems that Netanyahu has a very strong hold on the Likud party, and not a lot of members of Knesset will, although some of them are saying, but I don't think, but perhaps.
So if this, let's say this happens and we don't get much in way of compromise and the legislation passes as is there anything to prevent a flip in government in a subsequent election to return to the present judicial status quo, to just move it back?
So you're jumping. The next part of what will happen in Israel is a petition to the Israeli Supreme Court against these changes. And the court has declared in the past that it has the authority in very extreme cases to strike down even basic laws, which is a very difficult theory because the basic laws are the laws that give it the authority. However, the court has declared, I'm not going into this complicated constitutional question, but the first disagreement will be when a petition will be put before the court regarding the question of whether these changes are constitutional. So that's the first disagreement. Regarding the next election, see, this is, I'm not saying whether it will be, I'm not saying that the current government intends to do it, I'm not saying anything, I'm just pointing out the ability. Because the rules of the games in Israel are so easy to change, then the worry is there will be a next election, but whether some of the rules of the game will be changed by the next election in a way that will not actually allow the opposition to regain power. I'll give just one example here, okay? Just one example for what people are worried about. Once again, I'm not saying that the government is planning to do it. See, a lot, 20% of the population in Israel is Arab. It's relatively easy to enact laws that will disqualify Arab parties to run for the elections based on precedents, because these parties, for the most part, are naturally not Zionist parties. Now, what will be the response of the Arab population? It's possible that if Arab parties will be disqualified, the Arab population will simply not vote in the elections. They won't change their vote and now vote for the Zionist parties. They'll simply not vote. If the Arabs in Israel will not vote, in the large majority of the Arabs will not vote, then the right will win in Israel. It's that's the current situation. So I'm not saying that this is the intention of the current government. I'm not saying anyone can, plans to do it. I'm just saying once the court is out of the game, once striking down legislation and rules of the game by the court becomes very difficult and the court is out of the judicial review game, then it becomes possible to play, to game the system in a way that the next elections will not be completely, will be different.
Right. The letting that genie out of the bottle has many repercussions that can last a long time. Let's talk a little bit more about what I know IDI does a lot of work in understanding where Israeli society is on all of these things. And so there were some questions, first of all, about if you understand or have a measure of the polarization around some of the different segments of Israeli society, if we were to break it down further than just, what are some of the breakdowns that you're seeing, and are they different than we see sort of more generally around judiciary?
So we can see two blocks within the Israeli society which are very much for the changes, and these are the ultra-Orthodox blocks, and in very large percentage support of the changes, and the religious Zionist bloc very much for the changes. And on the other hand, we see the more secular liberal voters of, say, Yesh Atid and the Labour Party and the late Meretz Party, etc. All these, so they are in very large numbers. And I'm speaking now on the percentages are immense. So we're speaking about more than 90% support within the ultra-Orthodox and more than 90% opposition to the changes within the voters of the Yesh Atid and left parties. So polarization, and its numbers we have not seen on any other issues I'm not saying there was no polarization, but the numbers here, so that virtually everyone within the ultra-Orthodox society thinks the same way, and virtually everyone within the voters of the Yesh Atid and left parties are against these changes. So I think this is a very, very clear sign of polarization within the Israeli society. There are some people in the middle, in which people more perhaps traditional Mizrahi people. So there are people who are somewhere in the middle, who are not undecided or not. It's not so clear. But on the sides, the large populations are actually very, very polarized in these issues.
Let's just talk for a minute about the ultra-Orthodox, because that is at the heart of a lot of what we're seeing here. And as I understand it, there has been a great deal of push for judicial reform in Israel. That is not a new conversation.
Right.
But the 90+% of the ultra-Orthodox that are supporting this level of reform, what is, in your mind, is it a policy outcome that they're looking for, or is it a real problem with how the judiciary works that they are trying to solve?
It consists of, I think, three different reasons. I don't know enough. No one knows enough to say which is the most important. The first one is the ongoing disagreements between the court and the ultra-Orthodox society. So regarding recruitment to the army, the court has voiced several times its displeasure with the idea that the ultra-Orthodox men are not enlisting to the IDF, at least not enlisting in large numbers, because they learn in yeshivos. So, and it struck down several laws that the Knesset passed based on the idea of inequality in service. And this is just one example of several cases in which the court has viewed the sum of the policies of the, not everything, it's not always, not all decisions of the Israeli Supreme Court are, against the ultra-Orthodox. A lot of them support the ultra-Orthodox in specific issues, but there are important decisions. So that's the first. The second is that within the ultra-Orthodox society, there is and we have seen it for a long time, for at least for 10 or even 15 years, a growing disagreement with the liberalism in general. So liberalism here, small L, not liberals in the sense of just supporting the left, but liberal ideas and concepts and the ideas of rights. We have seen a growing discontent with these within the ultra-Orthodox society over the years. And the third, and it's connected, of course, to the first two, is that there is, once again, in the last 15 years, we can see a clear move within the ultra-Orthodox society to support of the extreme right in many policies, in terms of the policies in the territories, support of the Likud leaders. It didn't used to be like that. So, a generation ago, it could be feasible that the ultra-Orthodox will join Rabin's government. This is what happened in 1992. It's unthinkable now that the ultra-Orthodox will join any center-left government. It's impossible in the sense that their voters will simply, I think, not accept such a thing. So, and this is part of the discontent with the court. So these three reasons. So specific decisions, discontent with liberal values, and agreement and support of the right wing all push the ultra-Orthodox and the court towards a collision
Well, and one of the questions we had was about the shift to the right in Israel. And you and I spoke earlier about the demographic change and how in the US, there is this idea that we have a demographic shift that's going to move us maybe more to the left. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but people have spoken of that. That's not what you're seeing in Israel. And the question of why that move to the right, it seems that the increasing numbers of ultra-Orthodox and the sort of political alignment of the ultra-Orthodox is a big piece of that in terms of governing coalitions, yes?
Yes, we have to differentiate here between two moves. There is a move to the right within Israel in terms of national security policies toward the Palestinians, etc. It's clear, and it's in all segments of the Israeli society. It's not necessarily in one segment. There is also another move, which is already apparent, but it will become stronger, I would say, exponentially as time moves on. And it's the fact that the ultra-Orthodox society is growing in numbers which are not equal to anything we see in the Western world. So 6 or 7 or 8 kids per family is a common occurrence, and current statistics speak about a third of the Jewish population in Israel within until 2060. So in 2060, a third of the Jewish population, if the current trends continue, a third of the Jewish population in Israel will be ultra-Orthodox.
What is it now? What's the percentage?
Now it's about it's 11% in total, but we already see that in first graders it's already more than 20%.
Wow.
So we can see it coming along. So.
Okay, we have a number of questions, and I'll put these all together about.
So we have all day, right? So
yeah. No, I'm here till midnight, and it'll
okay.
be.
No, I'm here. I'm here.
I want to make sure you have breakfast with us. I think that would be great.
Yes.
Questions, and we have about 5 more minutes, and let's spend the time on this. About Jews in North America and the diaspora, and governments in North America and the diaspora. What is our role? What is our influence? Should we have influence? How are these changes likely to affect us? So if you could speak to that, and I know Biden had a conversation with Bibi. Where is all that, and what?
So I think, yeah. So I'll give 3 ideas, 3 avenues of thought. I don't have any conclusion on any of them, but 3 proposals. First is that some suggestions within the current government, for the day after, will affect Jews coming from America. So the ideas of changing the situation in the Kotel, the ideas of changing the law of return, the grandchild clause, and these will specifically affect the relationship between Israel and Jews in North America. The second is the involvement of Jews in Israel, in support, in visitation, in donations, in effect, because Israel is the home of the Jewish nations. And you can't hear it in my accent, okay? But I was born in England. I was very small when I came to Israel, and I was never able to adopt the correct accent, okay? And my father is still very disappointed by my Israeli accent when I speak English. However, I truly believe that Israel should have connections with the Jewish people abroad, and the Jews abroad should be involved in what happens in Israel. And the third point, and for me it's the most worrisome point, is that the alliance between Israel and many countries in the Western world are based on shared values. And the question of whether, and it's not connected directly to the current proposal. The current proposals are coming from many of the people supporting these proposals support liberal democracy. I'm speaking now on a more general level. of the question of the movement of certain segments within the Israeli societies away from shared values with liberal democracies around the world. For me, it's, I think, very worrisome, and I think it's worrisome for a lot of people in these states too.
It is. So I'll give a last question and then we'll wrap up, which is, do you think a satisfactory compromise is likely? And what, if anything, are you hopeful or optimistic about right now?
So first of all, I don't know if it's likely, it's possible. If it's likely, it's a political question. I don't have enough knowledge, but it's certainly possible. At the Israel Democracy Institute, we were involved in certain discussions regarding compromise. They didn't work out, but there'll be a compromise, I hope, and certainly it's possible to get to a compromise. And as I said in the beginning, I want to finish on a positive note here. The idea that de Tocqueville, when he visited America, was it 200 years ago, right? Almost in the democracy in America, he wrote that one thing he saw in America is that a lot of people are involved. They are involved in churches, they are involved in societies, they donate. And this is why he thought, Alexis de Tocqueville, that the democracy in America is so strong. So democracy in Israel right now is very strong in the sense that the society is involved in what is going on. And this is one of the most important assurances for the continuance of democracy, is that people are involved in what is going on. It's not just the politicians that are doing things. People are involved. And I see, as a positive thing, and I hope it will be for the good.
Thank you so much. I cannot thank you enough for spending this time with us and leaving us with a note of hope. I know how busy you are and that you walked away from a conference to spend this time with us. I want to thank Betsy and our incredible partners at the JCC. It's just wonderful to work with you all. And Betsy.
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that attended. Thank you to Heidi for your partnership, and thank you, Professor Cohen, for a very, very insightful and thoughtful representation. We appreciate it so much.
Yes, and so we will have a recording of this. We will make it available to everybody who registered. And please join us again. We have Shlomit Ravitsky-Terpaz is going to be speaking about issues of religion and state, and some of the things that you just heard about in terms of conversion and the Kotel and some of the, sorry, my lights just went off. I haven't moved. I've been wrapped with attention for so long. Some of the issues that many Jews in North America in the diaspora care deeply about. We're going to have a chance to really dig into those on March 30th. You can register for that as well. We appreciate everyone who spent their morning with us today. And we wish you the best. And we can't wait to see you and join with the Israel Democracy when many of us come in May to visit with you. And hopefully we'll see you there.
And have a happy Passover to everyone.
Sweet Pesach to you as well. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.